The leaves are falling, the air is chilling, and you could practically smell the Thanksgiving bird roasting in the oven. In college rugby, that can only mean one thing. It's playoff time. I'm joined, as always, by Wendy Young and Lance Kavanaugh, our experts, as we dive into the National Collegiate Rugby playoffs, which officially kick off this weekend with the first rounds of the women's postseason and a smattering of playing games on the men's side. We're going to dive into it all, every division, right here on the College Rugby Show with Wendy and Lance. We've also got highlights of the Big Rivers Conference playoffs from Friday Night Rugby, an interview with UNI women's head coach Megan Flanagan. But first, let's give the people what they want, playoff brackets. Helping us unveil our women's brackets, none other than NCR Women's Director Angela Smarto, the person who actually put them together. Starting in Division III, Smarto, tell us what we got.
Well, this is going to be fun because this year we have a guaranteed new division championship. So let's look at our front runners and see who has the best chances to make it all the way this year. We're going to start with last year's runner-up in the Midwest, University of Wisconsin-Platteville. They're going to be taking on an at-large bid, so they are expected to move on to a quarterfinal, but there's no guarantees to make it to a semifinal as every pool gets more competitive every year. Watch out for Gannon. They're our second place CRC team coming into the fall, so they know what it likes to play in high-stakes game. Moving into the West, our frontrunners right now, it's between History, a really good matchup. We're looking probably at a Wayne State School of Mines quarterfinal, which has some definite history in the long history of small college, but I don't really know. It could be a toss-up either way. New Wayne State is not old Wayne State, but they're working way their back. Wouldn't be counting out the Wildcats because they are very, very smart and they play very good rugby, and they could outsmart a more physical, more athletic School of Mines. Going back to our last champion, who, since St. Bonaventure left, the last champion was the Endicott Gulls. Everybody knows that Endicott, they play rugby to win championships. And when they don't get first place, they aren't very happy and they go for it again. The East is what we would call the pool of death here in Division III. All champions, all tight matchups, and every single one of these matches are going to be very hotly contested. So the Gulls want to win, but so does everybody else. And then moving down into the South, we have some historical matchups with Lee versus East Stroudsburg and some newbies. Christopher Newport from, you can Google it, I'm not going to tell you. They're a great team, but a young team, and they are going to play against SUNY Geneseo, who won the New York this year, and we're excited to see some new teams coming out of the New York Conference.
Yeah, realistically, as you look at this, Smarto, I see Endicott as a giant Goliath, 26-1 over the last 3 seasons. The only loss was that one you mentioned to St. Bonaventure. Are they really the front runner in this and everybody else is just playing for second?
That's the easy answer. I'm not counting out Platteville, who got so close last year and then didn't get it over the line. So they're definitely still thirsty for gold.
I love it. Let's move on to Division II, where all 4 of last year's semifinalists are back in the race. Smarto, what do we got in D2?
Well, looking first at D2, we had a little bit of a slip-up from our returning champions. Eau Claire actually lost in their conference championship weekend and had to get in on the at-large. So they have a much tougher first-round game than they're used to against Texas San Antonio. And they're looking to maybe have a rematch or playing against very familiar foes in Illinois. To one of them will advance to Houston this year, not both of them. Moving up to the Midwest, Cincinnati is who you should be looking at. The Bearcats, they had the closest point margin against Eau Claire last year in the quarterfinal out of all of playoffs and all of their 15s. They beefed up their schedule, they've had a lot of prep, and they really want to go back to Final Fours, which they haven't done since before 2020. Moving over to the other side of the bracket, Coast Guard looking really, really strong. But Roger Williams, Fairfield, and Delaware all having strong seasons, so it's not going to be easy for them. And moving into the South, of course, we're going to talk about Vassar. You have to talk about Vassar in D2 rugby. They're the team to beat, but they almost dropped their first match last year in playoffs playing against new opponents. So we'll see how they do this year against UNH.
Yeah, fantastic. Division II looks really good. It's tough to tell. Eau Claire, are they more underdogs or favorites as they go into this playoffs? Which one's on the bulletin board?
They're still favorites, but that doesn't mean that everyone thinks that they're going to win again. Winning 2 in a row is really hard. Winning 3 in a row is extremely rare because it's so difficult to do. So if they can if they can mix up what they do so it's not so predictable and so they can throw something new at these teams, they might get a third.
Awesome. Let's slide on over to D1, where we've got 8 teams contesting the quarterfinals Friday and semifinals Sunday. What do you make of this division?
This is the toughest D1 road to Houston we have seen. There is no round of 16. There are no at-large bids. It is very, very hard to get into this playoff, and all of these teams have earned it. So we're going to start on the east side with our 2-time returning champ, University of Michigan, is taking on new member Northeastern, who's used to winning championships of their own. So this will be a really good test for both teams on who the real deal really is. Moving to the bottom of your bracket, we're going to have Virginia, who has been in every playoff that I can remember since the beginning of time. Them and Nancy Ketchner are going to go up against new program, Wheeling, led by Ken Pape. They've really blown onto the scene. They've gone undefeated so far this season, and they really, really want to go to Texas. Moving to the other side, you've got NCR stalwart Northern Iowa. Even with a tougher conference, they still made it through undefeated against newcomer Colorado, coming out of the High Peaks Conference. This matchup, a lot of unknowns. Really unsure about where Colorado is in comparison to who we're used to seeing. So that one's going to be really fun. And then our last quarterfinal is going to be Southern Nazarene taking on Purdue. Purdue has really grown their program, and coming in second out of the Big Ten is nothing to snuff at because it is the most difficult conference that we have in D1. So they are prepared to take on a really tough physical opponent in Southern Nazarene, who's looking to get over that quarterfinal hump. They can't seem to ever win that first match, but they always win on day 2.
And now to help us sift through that sea of information we just got from Smarto, we have, of course, our expert panelists, Lance Cavanaugh of Great American Rugby and Wendy Young of Your Scrum Half Connection. Welcome to the crew, folks. Let's dive right into Women's Division 1. The last 2 years, the final has been Michigan, a club team, against Notre Dame College, a varsity team. This year, the juggernaut looking like they're gunning for Michigan's title is Wheeling, their first ever year as a program. They are a varsity program. They brought over a bunch of people from the transfer portal from a previous varsity program at Lander, where Coach Ken Pape came from. And that certainly accelerated their trajectory to a championship pathway, already 9-0. So it looks like this juggernaut of club versus varsity, which on the women's side, there's no bifurcation, is starting to come to a head. In the last 2 years, Paul Bunyan, the man, has beaten Machine in Michigan over Notre Dame College. But could this be the year that the Machine beats the man in varsity over club? And is this something that we're going to have to start looking at as something we have to bifurcate on the women's side like we do on the men's side? You, Wendy?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and thanks for wearing your glasses today so we could all look sweet, Pat. I think it's a really, really interesting question because it's happening across the game, right? It's happening in club. It's starting to happen in high school as well. We've got the single schools and the club schools, and same thing across the board. And I think we are going to come to a place where we need to break apart. I just don't know that we're quite there yet. And the big distinction here is full-time coach versus a volunteer coach, right? And there's a huge difference there. And we can even talked about last time with our player coaches. It makes a huge difference where you've got someone where it's their full-time job, they're getting a salary, they have a staff, versus just a volunteer that maybe they don't have a staff and they don't have anything. So I think that's going to be the difference. So when we get a full spectrum of full-time coaches, then I think it'll make difference to break and bifurcate, as you said. Until then, I think we've got to keep the groups together. And until a couple of varsity clubs they're taking it and winning it every single year, then it helps the conversation. We're not quite there yet.
Lance, I remember you at Davenport in those first couple of varsity years running around some kids that were only practicing 1 or 2 days a week. How big of a difference does it make?
Massive difference. Massive. Institutional backing has a big leg up for any team that gets it. But that doesn't mean that these club teams can't get wins. It doesn't mean that they can't show up and really put on a show for themselves. We seen it last year with teams like Michigan getting the win. I don't think we're to the point yet where there should be some separation, but we do need to examine it and make sure we keep a close eye on it, because last thing you want is a bunch of varsity schools running away with the title every year and taking away hope and really opportunities from those who have to get it from the mud, essentially.
So we've got Michigan as a favorite, and we've got Wheeling as a favorite. Who's that bracket buster, Wendy? Who's the upset team, the Cinderella that could put the slipper on and go all the way this year?
Yeah, I think it's got to be Northern Iowa. Like Smarto said, they've got a tough conference. They're undefeated. I think they're hungry and they're ready for it.
I think Southern Nazarene, Coach Eric Gilliland and Talesi Uatafe got something to say about that down there in Oklahoma. They are hungry. They could meet in Kansas City on Sunday if they both win on Friday. Can't wait to potentially see that match. All right, let's move on to Division II. Fantastic setup here in Division II that we've got coming up. What do you make of this one, guys? We got all 4 last year semifinalists, as we said, back in the race. Eau Claire, back-to-back defending champs, going for the three-peat, but not as conference champions, as an at-large bid because they got nipped in the conference championship game. What do you make of this division?
I think this one's really interesting with Eau Claire at the at-large, as you said, like really interesting as defending champions, just as you said, taking it barely over Vassar. I think that makes this really interesting, but we can't discount Vassar. They're such a strong club, but our Friday Night Rugby Coast Guard just put a stamp out there for everybody to see.
Yeah, totally. Anybody in this group stand out to you, Lance, as a player or a team to watch?
Cincinnati. I think they're going to have to show up real big against Bowling Green, but I think Cincinnati has a really good shot. Had to fight their way to get to where they're at. That's where I'm putting my eggs in those baskets, so to speak.
I like that. The Bearcats have done great so far. And now we'll move into Division 3. All right, in Division 3, we have Endicott. They are 7-0. They lost 1 game last year, and they went undefeated the year before. 26-1 in the last 3 years. Who's chasing the goals? Does anybody have a chance to beat them?
Yeah, I think Colorado Mines is really interesting. It's an old program. They've been around for a while. They've had some up and down years, and this one's an up. They're revitalized, and I think they're ready.
I got to go with Kobe. Something about the Northeast you got to show respect to. That's my bracket buster.
I love it. Potential early round mismatch. And now we're going to come back. When we come back, we're going to have Zach Landing, the Division III Commissioner for National Collegiate Rugby. He's going to do what Smarto just did on the men's side, run us through all the divisions and giving us all the information. Thank you, Lance. Thank you, Wendy. We'll be right back on the College Rugby Show. Joining us here, Zach the Man Lanning, our Division III Commissioner of National Collegiate Rugby, but knower of all divisions in college rugby. Going to run us through the brackets and what's, not brackets in every division because there's still some playing games this weekend. But let's start in Division I, where we know we're going to have a new champion because Notre Dame College, last year's champion, shuttered its doors and no longer exists. Talk us through it, Zach. What are we looking at in D1?
Absolutely, Pat. I'm happy to be here. Technically, Notre Dame College, last year's champion, could win this year as they have been absorbed by Walsh, who have made it into the Division I bracket. Here you see a lot of other familiar names, however. Walsh will play Indiana in a play-in game. They will then take on Brown, who are a solid team always and have another great season under Dave LaFlamme. We got another great matchups here. I think the story is really the play-ins, Pat. There are 3 play-in games this year, all of which go through Rugby East teams. So I mentioned that one earlier. Walsh from Rugby East will play Indiana. Kutztown Wheeling, another play-in. That's a matchup of last spring's Sevens National Championship, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Pat. The winner of that will take on Notre Dame, the Big Ten champion. And then we have the AIC versus Queens University of Charlotte, number 1 team in D1 in the poll here, who should be a formidable opponent for anybody. Then you also have Dartmouth and St. Bonaventure then playing game. The winner of that will take on Thomas More, who have gotten red hot lately, Pat. And so it's really anybody's game. A lot of familiar names here, as I said, but we'll have to see how those play-ins shake out to really get a good picture of the bracket.
Yeah, that's right. Wheeling winning the game against Thomas More in the regular season, and then the Saints beating the Cardinals for the Big Rivers Championship. Now let's dive into Division II here, Zach. Handicap this one for us, as I know IUP looks. Let's dive into Division I AA first, as Kentucky, defending national champions, look like the overwhelming favorite.
Absolutely. I think Kentucky's had a great year this year. Again, a little bit of challenge with the weather down south, but they'll be playing a St. Joe's team in the first round matchup here that lost a very close match to Virginia Tech in the MARC Championship. Virginia Tech taking on Boston College in their division. Look out though for Clemson as well, Pat, coming out of this. If they can beat the winner of the Bowling Green Louisville MAC Championship, I think Clemson has a pretty good shot. They lost to Kentucky by 1 point in the Southeastern Championship last weekend.
Yeah, that Bowling Green Louisville matchup, that's a huge one. I know Bowling Green got one back over Louisville after the Cardinals won the MAC championship last year. Is there a better ticket in the men's side of college rugby this whole weekend?
Absolutely not. I mean, that should be a real barn burner of a game there, Pat. Both teams had an excellent regular season in the conference, but they are going to, really beat each other up here heading into the playoffs. I'm going to be glued to my seat for that one.
Yeah, that one looks awesome. Now we'll slide on to Division II, where we have another overwhelming favorite and a defending champion in IUP, the Crimson Hawks. They look fantastic yet again. Talk us through this Sweet 16. I know we got a few playing games here too.
Absolutely. I think that the playing games for this one are interesting. They've been a part of D2 history for some time. This is actually the fewest number of playing games that Division II has seen in their bracket since 2018, I believe. But IUP has a pretty good chance of repeating here, Pat. I think they're the heavy favorites going into this. But don't count out Salisbury. If they can get past Coastal Carolina in that play-in, they were a pretty good contender coming out of the mark. But also look out for Norwich. Is always a competitive team there in the East Regional as well, and Northern Iowa should be a competitive team as well coming out of the West.
That's right. You never want to bet against the fighting Bob Waiglers. All four teams back from last year's Final Four. You know, I look at Northern Iowa. Nick Marker took a gruesome hip injury in their semifinal, which was a real nail-biter. A lot of teams looking for some revenge here against IUP. Who's your favorite of that Final Four group to get back and go the furthest?
We'd probably have to go with Northern Iowa there. I think they've got a good shot. They had a very good regular season here. And as I said, they have some scores to settle. So I would definitely pick Northern Iowa there coming out of D2.
And who's the one to get knocked out first, you think?
Ooh, that's a very good question. Maybe we'll go with Norwich. How about that, Pat? We'll say with Norwich there. I don't want to stand on that, but...
All right, well, I'll have the conciliatory hug for Bob if that happens. Moving on to Division III, small college. No one knows this division better than you. You drew this bracket, my friend. Walk us through it.
Absolutely. So the graphic kind of illustrates what a challenge we have here. I think getting all of these really competitive divisions to match up against each other here. We have a lot of play-ins still to go in Division III. But once those are all settled, I think we're going to have a very competitive bracket here. I look at in the play-ins here, you'll notice the defending champion Batson sitting there, still looking to secure their spot in the teams. They lost to Holy Cross, my alma mater, in the NERFU championship. But anybody, I think, coming out of those teams in the hunt are going to be, a lot more than some of these teams can handle. See some new names as well, Pat. Look for Miracosta College in the hunt as well, coming out of Southern California to potentially make a deep run into the playoffs as well.
All right, glasses are off for those who can see without them, and gloves are now off as we are going to duke it out over those brackets, those divisions, what we just learned from Zach Lanning. Let's start in Division III where we just left off. Lance, Babson, the Beavers, I know you've got that bucket cap close by at all times. They got nipped a little bit, last year's defending champs already, but they're still in the mix potentially if they win their play-in game this weekend. Wayne State, the runner-up of the last two seasons, they're back in the mix if they win their play-in game this weekend. What do you think of this Division III as we head into the playoffs?
This is going to shape up to be a very contested, highly contested and excited Division III. Holy Cross winning against Babson, with Babson walking into the game knowing how dangerous and underrated Holy Cross is. For them to get that win in the championship spells the pathway for an amazing ending. I can't wait to see how this tournament ends up.
The largest division in all of college rugby, Wendy. It is also often one of the hardest to predict with some of the, as we talked about, favorites already losing this season. What are your thoughts on Division III here?
Yeah, I agree. And it's just there's so much to say about in the hunt teams, and we've got a lot of rugby to play, so we're making really big swings here. So I'm going to go with one, Christendom. They had a losing record for most of the season. They've got a really tough schedule, but they beat VMI to win their conference, and they're on the way.
Yeah, Christendom is always annually one of the top teams to look at, perennial powerhouse in small college. I'm looking at Slippery Rock. They came out of a really tough division. They beat some good teams there and over the top of Xavier as well. So, Division III, almost impossible to predict. But those Wayne State Wildcats, the bridesmaids each of the last 2 years, I got to think the second year under head coach Brent Shivers, they're my favorites in D3. Moving on to Division II. Guys, IUP. Anybody got a chance here, Lance, to beat IUP and the Crimson Hawks?
a proven commodity. I don't know how we can bet against IUP taking it. And not only just their program as a whole is just powerful. I got them taking it again, but anything can happen.
And Wendy, anybody stick out to you as somebody that can come from behind and nip them?
Yeah, the only one I'm thinking is Grand Valley State. You know, they played them really close, 33-43. They lost to IUP, and they matched it up against last year's Memphis in round 16. So I think they can do it, but they've got to get through the first round.
Yeah, that's right. Division II is going to be very competitive. Let's move on to D1 AA. This one is very contentious, as we talked about. We still have the MAC championship leading into this. Louisville, Bowling Green, two highly ranked teams. Only one of them is going to get through here into the next round. What are you looking at in D1 AA? Does Clemson have a chance, losing narrowly to Kentucky in the SEC? Lance, who are the comers here in this division?
To bet against Clemson would be a smarter move than to bet against Louisville, but to beat a Bowling Green team, as focused and organized as they have been, they hold down Wood County in Ohio. Bowling Green is a tough squad, but I think Louisville might be the team to do it. They're a very strong side with good coaching.
And Wendy, anybody in Division II that's catching your eye? Anybody's going to slip on that Cinderella slipper and bust some brackets?
Yeah, I think Clemson might be the one to do it. It had a close loss to Kentucky in the Southeastern Rugby Conference, 7-8, but I think they can do it. They've shown they've got big dudes up front. They can run fast. They're just tough. They might be the ones for me.
That's right. Troy Hall and the Clemson Tigers, very well coached side, and they have been right on the heels of the Kentucky Wildcats the last few years. Let's move on to Division I, right? Walsh, they're representing NDC, but not the same university, not the same team. Queens ranked number 1. What do you make of this division, Lance?
Queens is a strong side. They deserve to be at the top of the heap. But Walsh is the team that we know they are. Last year's champions, a little bit of a mutation, new colors, new scheme, but they got to win against Penn State. They got to win against Thomas More. And as long as they're in the tournament, it is their tournament to take.
All right, and for you, Wendy, Division I seems to be wide open. Brown looks like they could be a favorite. Thomas More upsetting Wheeling in the Big Rivers. This is a tough one to predict. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with what you just said, Thomas More. The upset there, I think, is just give them the edge. They're going to feel really strong there. But, man, Lance, Walsh is really tough to beat. You're right.
That's it. I'll call my bracket buster. Dartmouth Big Green and the Fightin' Kyle Sumptions from a play-in game all the way to Houston. They can do it. They were within a couple of scores of Brown. That was a more competitive game than people thought. So let's give them a shot here. These play-in games, these teams are good. And now we're going to throw it over to our Big Rivers highlights. These are our last Friday night rugby games of the season. We saw two fantastic matchups as our Big Rivers semifinals were our double header. Let's throw it over here to John Broker with those highlights.
We are just about to get underway here at this Chicago Lions for Hope facility. Friday night rugby, National Collegiate Rugby. This is for all the marbles. You see Ayub Jolly getting set to kick that one off. Jolly from Casablanca. Big run from Tyshawn Thomas, doing what he does so well, taking the bodies with him. Little wrap around there. Look at that move coming back in. Zubiri. Wheel says his name. Next thing you know, he's got the ball headed to the try line. And a beautiful move. They couldn't have planned it any better. Now they go to Cohen Webb. Cohen Webb again, looking for the positional play. He's got an eye out for those 50-22s. Not going his way so far, but this one doesn't quite bounce as well as it can for Hadar. Hadar can show his heels if he has to. Hadar has played an awful lot of sevens, and for Morocco as well. Breaks around that time, and it's going to be a massive moment from Mohammed Hadar. Thomas Moore trying to drive over this one. Ball's a little loose in there, but Dobby's going to get it back. Try score of Bali in that first receiver position. They're going for the kick pass here. Across field, trying to take advantage of some height, and the ball is up in Thunder Chicken's hands. Thunder Chicken's on the move right now. The big break, the big try. Abele gets that one out. Cohen Webb chips that one through. It's inside the 22. Taken there by Mendaza. It's messy all over the place. Kicked back by a number of players. Luhanga to put this one in. Luhanga gets tapped back by Thomas Moore. Getting a good head of steam here. There he is again. A little show of the ball. Matasini steps one. Matasini puts one in. This connection happens. And Bautista, St. Bonnet, each other Tritons. Ball taken away, however, sat there too loose. They were trying to run it. Comes back to the Cardinals. Will the Cardinals have last say? Ball up in the air into the hands of Chaniwa. Chaniwa at the 22. Holland, the replacement scrum half. Stepping back in. Good run coming here, and it's going to be last rites and last words from the Wheeling University Cardinals.
Wheeling certainly the better of the two sides today. Some individual brilliance, but overall team cohesion, the ability to attack from anywhere.
River semifinal, 34-25, 9-point win for the Thomas More University Saints over the Principia College Thunder Chickens. That is it for us. National Collegiate Rugby has brought you Friday Night Rugby. Thank you to everybody at NCR and all these teams for the great work that they do. From Next Level Rugby and all of us, he is Thomas Wheels Grant, and I am John Broker. Hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Some titillating highlights there from the Big River semifinals. More hot action coming to you through the NCR airwaves as the playoffs get going, and we got a lot of streaming action coming to you. But now, let's go straight to our first ever coach interview here on the College Rugby Show. Somebody that's going to be a trivia question. Who was the first ever coach interviewed on the College Rugby Show? And it's going to be none other than Megan Flanagan of Northern Iowa Women. I am joined by Megan Flanagan, known affectionately around the rugby world as Flanny. She is the head coach of Northern Iowa, her alma mater. She's been the head coach there since 2016. They are currently ranked number 3 in the country, 6-0 undefeated, and the Midwest Conference champs going into the playoffs. Welcome to the show, Flanny. Congrats on a great season so far.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, it's exciting times. I'm excited to have you down into beautiful Kansas City this weekend, as we're going to be hosting you at our regionals here at the CPKC training facility, the Kansas City Current. They're going for the NWSL Championship, the first ever women's purpose-built soccer stadium. That's the franchise. You're playing at their training facility. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm excited to have you guys there.
Oh, we're so stoked. I was excited when that venue came out. I was like, heck yes, we got to get to Kansas City.
Yeah, totally. All right. Well, tell me about the squad. You guys have been fantastic this year. A couple of close games there against Minnesota and Eau Claire. They're a dominant Division II team. So you look battle-tested. How do you feel about your team coming into the playoffs?
I feel really good, really confident, actually. We had 13 returning players is all for this season, and we gained 16 new people. And I'm talking brand new to the sport, never played before. So we worked through the season. We worked out some kinks. We have a lot of athleticism. We have some really good leadership with some of our veterans who've had great experiences in other rugby teams. So coming back here and leading the new girls, we're really excited. And I think we've kind of gotten our puzzle pieces figured out for this postseason.
Well, I guess this question kind of applies to more the 13 returners than the 16, but maybe they've indoctrinated them here in the team's recent history. You guys have been knocked out of the playoffs the last 2 years by Michigan, who went on to win it. Last year in the semifinals, the Final Four, by just a single score. I can't imagine that was an easy one to get over. How has that motivated you guys, or how has that bled over at all into this season?
Oh, it's a huge motivator. You have the vets returning that, I'd rather lose by a lot than 1 point because it's just more heartbreaking that way. But they've been hitting the gym. They've been hitting the ground running ever since then. And they've put in way more work outside of practices and training times than I've ever seen in the last 4 years with this group. So, yeah, it was a huge motivator. Hats off to Jamie and her crew. They're great all the time. So to lose to them was fine with it. And then we're just going to use it going forward.
That's awesome. And then lastly, we've got some new teams in the bracket this year, including your first round opponent in Colorado. There's Wheeling over there, first ever year as a program, doing awesome. What do you make of this expanded competition? It looks like it might be, one of the more hotly contested women's playoffs that we've had.
I love it. I always say if you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. And to finally have a lot more teams in the arena, it's great. So I'm excited. This is going to be the best competition yet, the best season, and I hope we just keep growing.
All right, we can't wait to watch you this weekend in Kansas City. That's Megan Flanagan, the head coach of the number 3 ranked UNI Panthers, heading into the playoffs.
Thanks, Pat.
So that's going to do it for our show tonight, guys. For Lance Kavanaugh, for Wendy Young, and everybody else who joined us today, Zach Landing, Angela Smarto. I'm Pat Clifton. Thanks for tuning in.
From nosebleeds to floor seats, circle stronger than Cuban links. My gold dance, your gold plated. You verse me, now that's to reach.